The morning fog still clung to the edges of Cliffmore Valley as Gabriel Vaughn pushed open the weather-worn door of the Lantern Fork. He didn't come for pity, just a cup of black coffee, hot enough to remember warmth. But the moment his boots touched the checkered floor, silence cut the room in half. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair, and at the corner booth, Officer Silas Whitmore gave a sharp nod to his partner, Derek Kyle. They approached like they'd done this before, with that same practiced smirk, the same tension that made your spine stiffen even before they spoke. Gabriel offered a quiet, "Good morning," but it was met with a shove. Kyle's voice followed, low and mocking. "You don't belong here." He didn't resist. Not when Silas gripped his arm. Not even when his duffel bag hit the floor and a faded photo spilled out, creased from years of folding. A girl, maybe 12, standing in front of a house marked "Condemned." Gabriel moved to pick it up, but a boot pinned it down. "You looking for her?" Silas sneered. Gabriel didn't answer. He couldn't, because the weight in his chest was heavier than the badge pressing down on his dignity. He had walked miles with that picture, slept in bus stations and under bridges just to find the girl who once called him Dad. But now, face down on a diner floor, cuffed and humiliated, he realized something worse than being lost, was being unseen. And the worst part? No one in that diner lifted a finger, except the waitress. She watched it all unfold and quietly reached for the phone under the counter. Gabriel didn't flinch as the cuffs bit into his wrists. He'd felt worse, heard worse, but nothing stung like the moment Silas snatched the worn military ID from his wallet and let it fall to the greasy tile. "Trash like you think this means something?" Kyle scoffed, grinding his heel into it. A silence fell over the diner, not out of respect, but disgust. A man in uniform once, now dismissed like spoiled meat. They called him a vagrant, a stain on their town. What they didn't know, what they didn't care to know, was that Gabriel Vaughn had once been Colonel Vaughn, a strategist trusted with black ops too classified for paper. A man who'd made impossible calls at 3 a.m. while his team bled in foreign deserts. And the only reason he wasn't in Arlington with the rest was because he'd taken a bullet shielding a young private. Barely 20, barely a father. The wound had healed. But the country he'd bled for, it didn't remember. Not when he wore boots scuffed by sleeping on pavement. Not when his medals were traded for warmth, one by one. Kyle laughed. "Bet that's a fake anyway." Gabriel stayed silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew their war wasn't with him. It was with what he represented. The waitress, same girl from earlier, picked up the discarded ID tag when they dragged him out. She turned it over, read the name, and her hands trembled. Because that same name was etched into the corner of a framed photograph on her late grandfather's mantel. And suddenly, nothing made sense anymore. Scarlett Monroe's hands were trembling, but not from fear, from fury. She had watched the entire thing unfold. The ID tossed, the insults, the stomped dignity. She couldn't move then, not when two officers with guns were grinning like predators, but her instincts, sharpened from growing up with 3 military brothers, kicked in. She had slipped her phone from her apron pocket, positioned just behind the coffee machine's shadow, and hit record. No one noticed, not the other servers, too afraid to breathe. Not the manager who quietly looked away, and certainly not Silas and Kyle, who treated the takedown like a sport. When they dragged Gabriel outside, the phone kept rolling, capturing every cruel word, every dismissive laugh. And when it ended, Scarlett didn't cry. She didn't scream. She went to the storeroom, locked the door, and found an old name in her contacts, Mason Trigg, 5th Recon. They hadn't spoken in years. But some bonds, forged in desert heat in blood-soaked letters, never die. She sent the video without a word. Just the caption, "You need to see this. His name's Gabriel Vaughn." Then she did something reckless. She walked outside, found Gabriel slumped against the wall, and knelt beside him. No badge, no rank, just human to human. "They don't know who you are," she whispered, "but I think they're about to." And for the first time in years, Gabriel didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The video landed on Vincent Monroe's encrypted line at exactly 3:14 p.m. He was in a classified briefing 2 floors below the Pentagon's surface, surrounded by intelligence officers and war planners. But when he saw the sender's name, Scarlett Monroe, and read the message, his heart skipped. He excused himself without a word, locked the door, pressed play. 37 seconds in, he stopped breathing. The image of Gabriel Vaughn, face down on a diner floor, wrist twisted behind his back, hit him like a mortar shell. Not because it was a soldier humiliated, but because it was that soldier. Kandahar 12 years ago. A convoy ambushed, fire everywhere, and a young Major Monroe pinned under burning steel, screaming for help no one heard, until Gabriel tore through gunfire, lifted 200 pounds of twisted metal, and carried him bleeding half a mile to the extraction point. The medics said Monroe wouldn't have made it another 60 seconds. He never forgot that. And now the man who saved his life was being crushed by the very system they'd both sworn to defend. Vincent didn't hesitate. He opened a secure comms line and gave the only order that mattered. Activate Protocol Haven. Now. Back in Cliffmore Valley, while the townsfolk scrolled through weather apps and grocery ads, a black SUV with no plates was already pulling out of Andrews Air Force Base. Gabriel had once carried him through fire. Now it was his turn to return the debt, with interest. When General Vincent Monroe dialed the direct line to Cliffmore Valley PD, his voice was colder than steel. On the other end, Police Chief Nathaniel Sterling leaned back in his office chair, eyes narrowing as the name appeared on caller ID. He didn't answer with a greeting, just a long silence. "You know who I am, Chief," Vincent said, every word deliberate. "And you know exactly who that man was." Sterling scoffed, masking the sudden shift in his pulse. "With respect, General, this isn't a military matter. It's a local situation. Trespassing. Vagrancy." Vincent didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "A Medal of Valor recipient was assaulted in your town. Your officers treated a decorated colonel like garbage. And now that video is circling D.C. faster than wildfire. You have 1 hour to act, before we do." The line went dead. Sterling stood, jaw tight, staring out the window at the quiet streets he'd ruled for over a decade. Streets where complaints vanished, where cameras conveniently malfunctioned, where those who dared to question authority ended up in overnight cells. Or worse, he'd built his empire on silence. But now, that silence was cracking. Downstairs, a rookie officer named Riley had seen the video too. She'd grown up in Cliffmore, idolizing Sterling, until now. Her hands shook as she clutched her badge, wondering if it meant anything at all. Outside, the hum of an unmarked SUV echoed down Main Street. For the first time in years, Chief Sterling realized someone bigger was watching, and this time, they weren't looking away. Chief Nathaniel Sterling didn't wait for the hour to pass. He made the call before Vincent's threat could echo through the corridors of power. His voice was sharp, no room for debate. "Book him. Bridgepine Station. Use public disturbance as the charge. Keep it off the system." The patrol car turned the corner just as Gabriel was sipping the water Scarlett had brought him. He didn't resist. Again. But this time, there was a shift in his eyes. Not surrender. Something colder. Something that had once stared down snipers from rooftops in Helmond. Bridgepine Station was barely functional. An abandoned outpost turned holding cell. Mold in the corners. No cameras. No clocks. Just silence thick enough to drown in. They took his boots. Locked him in with no phone call. No lawyer. When the young officer, Riley, slipped in a granola bar and whispered, "They're not supposed to do this," Gabriel just smiled. "I've had worse," he said softly. "But you haven't. Don't lose your compass now." Then as she turned to leave, he slid something across the bench. The folded photo of the girl. His daughter. "Find her," he whispered. "If this goes south, she deserves to know I didn't vanish." It wasn't a plea. It was a contingency, spoken like a soldier preparing for a mission he might not return from. Outside, clouds gathered over Cliffmore Valley. Inside Bridgepine Station, justice had just been gagged. Again. But this time, too many had seen it, and silence wasn't going to be enough. The cell was colder than Gabriel remembered, or maybe it was just the weight in his chest. Hours passed without a word. No clocks, no names. Just the kind of silence that tried to erase a man from the world. Then came the scrape of rubber soles outside. The door creaked open just wide enough for a hand to slide through. A crust of bread wrapped in napkin, and beneath it a folded scrap of yellow paper, smudged with ink. Gabriel unfolded it slowly. Just 4 words. You're not forgotten. G. He looked up, but the figure was already moving away. A faint limp, a familiar posture. That's when it hit him. Genevieve Clark. They'd crossed paths in Mosul. She'd been a combat medic, sharp, unflinching, and the only one who didn't flinch pulling shrapnel from his thigh after a night raid gone wrong. Now she wore a worn corrections badge and fatigue in her eyes. Later that night, when she came to collect his tray, she paused. "Someone's looking into this," she murmured, eyes not meeting his. "And not just anyone. Big names. People who still remember." Gabriel didn't answer, but his throat tightened. As she turned, he whispered, "Why risk this?" She stopped, hand on the steel frame. "Because once," she said, "you didn't let me die on a dirt road outside Fallujah. I figure it's time I returned the favor." And in that moment, between two ghosts of old wars, hope flickered. Small, quiet, but unkillable. The next morning, Cliffmore Valley woke up to a headline that wasn't just misleading, it was a smear. Aggressive vagrant arrested at local diner. Police prevent potential threat. The photo was grainy, cropped to show Gabriel's worn coat and tired eyes. But none of the badges, none of the bruises. The footage Scarlett had taken was nowhere to be found. The story painted a picture of danger, of a man with no past, no honor, no home. Within hours, whispers turned to fear. Mothers clutched their children tighter, walking past Bridgepine Station. Shop owners taped handwritten signs to their windows. "We reserve the right to refuse service." At Maple and Company Market, a boy named Eli, 10 years old, quiet, curious, watched his mother toss the morning paper in the trash. "Is that the man from the diner?" he asked. She didn't answer at first, then, "Yes. Stay away from people like that." But Eli remembered something else. The way Gabriel had picked up the picture that fell. The way his hands shook. Not like a threat, but like someone holding something precious. That night, Eli slipped out with a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil. He left it on the back steps of Bridgepine Station, tucked behind a milk crate. No note, just food, just kindness. Inside his cell, Gabriel never saw the boy. But when he found the sandwich, still warm from a child's hope, he knew not all hearts had turned. Not yet. For 2 days, the town only saw what they were told. A threat in rags, a man better forgotten. But algorithms don't bend to small-town politics. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the unedited video Scarlett had uploaded, grainy, raw, and utterly human, slipped through the cracks of silence. It showed Gabriel's voice, measured, calm. It showed the shove, the stomp, the military ID sliding across the floor like an insult. Within hours, it had 12,000 views. By morning, 200,000. Across the state, veterans' forums lit up. People who hadn't spoken in years suddenly tagged each other. "This is Vaughn, Colonel Vaughn." At a nursing home in Ashgrove, an amputee Marine knocked over his breakfast tray when he saw the footage. "He carried me out of Kandahar," he whispered. "That man saved lives." In a basement in Fairpoint, 3 former Rangers dusted off uniforms they swore they'd never wear again. One of them, shoulders shaking, whispered, "We lost too many brothers to let this happen in peace." And somewhere between state lines, a woman named Elise, widow of a soldier who'd served under Gabriel, sold her wedding ring to pay for gas. She didn't leave a note, just packed a duffel bag and whispered to the photo on her dashboard, "I owe him that much." The algorithm had done what the town tried not to. It remembered. And the soldiers came, not with guns, but with truth. And a storm was brewing that no headline could contain. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of Willowshade Hall. The townsfolk gathered slowly, unsure if they were attending a hearing or witnessing history. Inside, the council murmured nervously, flipping through printed statements, still clinging to the hope that the noise outside was just internet smoke. It wasn't. The doors swung open, not with chaos, but with purpose. First came Theodore Wells, broad-shouldered, silver in his beard, metals gleaming not from pride but from memory. Behind him, 15 others, veterans, men and women who had once walked through fire under Gabriel Vaughn's command. Now they walked again, for him. The room fell silent. Theodore stepped forward, removed his cap, and placed it gently on the council table. His voice, when it came, didn't shake. "My name is Sergeant Major Theodore Wells. I was there when Gabriel Vaughn carried Corporal Leland across open field under enemy fire, after taking shrapnel to the ribs. He didn't ask who we voted for. He didn't care what color we were. He just pulled us out of hell." He paused, reached into his pocket. "This," he said, holding up a rusted chain, "is the dog tag he pressed into my hand when I couldn't feel my legs. I promised I'd stand again someday to return the favor." He looked around, eyes sharp. "I'm standing now." And for the first time, the town's silence cracked, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. Outside, more boots were coming, and this time, they weren't marching away. While the town of Cliffmore trembled under the weight of old lies cracking, something quieter, more powerful, was moving beneath the surface. In Washington, D.C., inside a restricted server room 4 floors below the Pentagon, General Vincent Monroe leaned over a classified file that hadn't been touched in over a decade. His fingers hovered over the send button. No press release, no warning, just a silent upload, straight to the Federal Circuit. Attached was a full record of Colonel Gabriel Vaughn's service. 3 tours, 7 commendations, and 1 citation sealed by executive order. Medal of Honor, awarded for saving 32 lives during a failed extraction in the Coast Province. He'd stayed behind as the last chopper lifted off, drawing fire away from the evac point, bleeding through his boots until a backup unit arrived. He should have died. Instead, he vanished into the world he'd once fought for. Nameless, homeless, forgotten, but not anymore. That evening, the clerk at the federal court received a ping flagged urgent. She opened the file, paused, then called her supervisor. An hour later, the district judge halted all proceedings in Cliffmore. "New evidence received, cases under federal review." Back in Bridge Pine Station, Gabriel sat against the cold concrete wall, unaware of the ripples now moving for him. But miles away, Vincent closed the file with shaking hands. "You gave everything," he whispered. "Time they gave it back." And just like that, the silence turned. This time, it was the system that had to answer. The order from the federal court arrived just after sunrise. By noon, half the town knew something had changed. But it wasn't the judge or a politician who first stepped into the cell where Gabriel Vaughn sat. It was Lillian Windsor, young, sharp-eyed, not from a major network, but she had something rarer than credentials: courage, and a voice no one had yet paid to silence. She fought for clearance, pushed past protocols, and finally stood face to face with the man the town still called a threat. But she didn't see a threat. She saw the tremor in his hands as he folded the photo of his daughter back into his pocket. She saw the kind of fatigue that didn't come from hunger, but from being unseen too long. "I don't want pity," Gabriel said softly, "but I won't let a lie be the last thing they remember me for." The interview was brief, raw, no fancy setup, just Lillian's phone on the bench between them and the echo of her questions bouncing off concrete. "What happened to your medals?" she asked. Gabriel looked up. "Sold one for a winter coat. Gave one to a kid who thought being brave made you bulletproof. The last one, I buried, with a man who didn't make it." Her throat caught. She stopped recording, but not before Gabriel added one last thing. "Tell them I didn't fall. I was pushed." That clip aired that night, and this time, the world didn't scroll past. It stopped and listened. The morning after the interview aired, Officer Silas Whitmore's name was officially listed as suspended pending investigation. To the public, it sounded like justice in motion. But behind closed doors, darkness moved faster. Scarlett Monroe's phone rang at 2:13 a.m. No caller ID, just silence. Then a voice, cold, familiar. "You think that camera makes you brave? Brave gets people hurt." Click. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. By sunrise, the sun filtered through the blinds of her tiny apartment above the lantern fork, casting long, pale stripes across the floor where she sat, arms wrapped around herself, phone clutched in her hand. She considered deleting the recordings, pulling back, disappearing. But then she opened the box in her drawer, the one with her brother's old uniform neatly folded inside. He'd died in service. Gabriel had spoken at his funeral. "Your brother died standing for something. Don't sit down now." That's what he told her. Scarlett stood. She went to the station and filed a formal report, knowing full well it might disappear. She sent the audio to 3 news outlets, then to Lillian Windsor, and finally to Vincent Monroe. Later that day, a reporter asked Scarlett if she was scared. She didn't blink. "Of course I'm scared," she said, "but not as scared as they are." For the first time in a long time, those who once held power were feeling it slip, and that's when things start to break. Or change. Bridgepine Station had always been silent after midnight, by design. No staff, no visitors, just shadows that swallowed secrets. But that night, 2 figures moved in the dark. Genevieve Clark knew the blind spots. She'd memorized them back when the station still used VHS. Now everything was digital, but the corruption stayed analog. She led Scarlett through the rear hallway, past the rusted file cabinets, until they reached the secured maintenance room. "You have 5 minutes," Genevieve whispered, sliding her badge into the reader. After that, the motion sensors pinged dispatch. Scarlett's hands shook as she pulled the USB drive from her coat. The monitor flickered, static and timestamps. She scrubbed backward. There. The moment Gabriel was booked. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stood, hands raised as Silas shoved him against the wall. Scarlett hit download. Then, footsteps. Genevieve moved fast. She shoved Scarlett behind the door, grabbed the mop from the corner, and began scrubbing the floor like she belonged there. When Officer Kyle passed, half asleep and uninterested, she gave him a nod. "Late shift's boring," she muttered. He grunted, kept walking. Only when his footsteps vanished did Genevieve exhale. Scarlett stepped out, USB clenched tight. "That footage clears him," she said. Genevieve didn't smile, just whispered, "Then don't waste it." And in that quiet moment, between fear and duty, a truth was saved, not with a badge, but with courage. The footage hit the internet like a thunderclap. Within hours it was everywhere. News outlets, veteran forums, even classrooms. Gabriel Vaughn, hands raised, no threat. Just dignity met with force. By noon, a small group had gathered in front of the Cliffmore Police Department. No megaphones, no riot chants, just silence and signs. "He served our nation. You serve injustice." At first, the officers inside ignored it. Just another wave to ride out. But then came the moment no one expected. Mrs. Evelyn Porter, 83 years old, former schoolteacher, cane in hand, stepped forward. She'd lived in Cliffmore Valley her whole life. She hadn't marched since the civil rights era, but she had taught Gabriel in 5th grade. "He gave a speech once," she said, raising her voice. "Said heroes don't wear capes. They carry burdens." Then she laid a single rose on the police station steps. "For the burden you gave him," she whispered, "and the silence we let cover it." More joined. A mechanic in oil-stained overalls. A young mother with a baby on her hip. A teenager who had never met Gabriel, but saw something in him that felt like truth. Inside the station, Chief Sterling watched from the blinds, jaw tight. He could feel it, control slipping like sand through his fingers. Outside, no one chanted. They just stood, like soldiers, like truth that refused to kneel. The quiet outside the station didn't last long. By the end of the week, the State Internal Affairs Division had arrived, armed with sealed warrants and decades of unanswered complaints. The target? Chief Nathaniel Sterling. What started as a review of Gabriel Vaughn's case quickly unraveled into something darker, deeper. Hidden among archive files were falsified police reports. Dozens, all targeting black veterans. Traffic stops spun into charges. Loitering tickets escalated to probation violations. The same signatures, the same patterns. All roads leading back to Sterling, but what cracked the silence wasn't a file. It was a man, Lieutenant Marcus Delaney, 25 years on the force. decorated, respected. He walked into the hearing chamber in full-dress blues, chest heavy with medals he now wore like anchors. When asked if he had anything to say, he stood and placed a folder on the table. "I signed these," he said, voice hollow. "I trusted my superior. I thought I was protecting the town, but all I did was protect a lie." He turned to the crowd, eyes locking on Gabriel's photo projected behind the council bench. "He didn't fail this country," Delaney whispered. "We did." Gasps, silence. And then a single, slow clap. Scarlett, then Genevieve, then the room. For once, the truth had a badge, and it was finally speaking. The gymnasium at Cliffmore Valley High had never been that full. Folding chairs stretched wall to wall, news cameras perched like silent birds. Outside, more residents waited by the windows, unable to get in but unwilling to leave. The town council sat stiffly behind a long table, and at the center of the stage, Gabriel Vaughn, no uniform, no prepared speech, just the man they had once dragged across a diner floor, now standing taller than ever. He looked out across the sea of faces, some ashamed, some defiant, some simply waiting. "I wasn't supposed to speak today," Gabriel began, voice low but steady. "But silence is what let this happen." A pause, then, "I fought for a country that didn't always fight for me. That's not bitterness, it's fact. But I never stopped believing we could be better, because I've seen better. In a girl who risked her job for truth, in a woman who smuggled me bread, in strangers who remembered what dignity looks like." He reached into his coat, pulled out a worn, weathered photograph. "My daughter doesn't know this man," he said. "She only knows the stories. I came here today not to ask for justice, but to show her what it sounds like." The room stilled, not out of guilt, but reverence. Because for the first time, Cliffmore Valley didn't just hear a man speak, it listened. And that changed everything. The morning after the hearing, journalists swarmed outside Bridgepine Station, waiting for a headline. They expected fire, lawsuits, a man ready to tear down the system that tore him apart. But Gabriel Vaughn stepped out in silence. No legal team, no cameras trailing him. Just the same coat, the same quiet weight in his eyes. At a press conference called by the town council, he finally spoke again. "I won't be filing charges," he said. "Not for myself." A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. "But I do have one demand," Gabriel continued. "Every arrest record, citation, and conviction involving veterans, especially men of color, needs to be re-examined under independent oversight. Not tomorrow, not someday, now." He held up a single folder. "This," he said, "belonged to Leonard Clay, Navy corpsman, arrested for aggressive loitering in 2017. He died last winter, alone in a shelter 2 towns over. This was all that was left in his bag." The crowd quieted. "He didn't get a press conference," Gabriel said softly. "He got forgotten." Scarlett's eyes welled. Lillian Windsor stopped recording. For a moment, the story was too sacred for lenses. Gabriel looked up. "This was never just about me," he said. "It was about a system that treats sacrifice as disposable." And in that moment, Cliffmore Valley didn't just confront its shame, it was asked to fix it. 1 year later, the rusted sign above Bridgepine Station came down. In its place, Cliffmore Veterans Center, carved in warm cedar, framed by flags not just of country, but of each military branch. What was once a cold cell block now held therapy rooms painted in soft earth tones. The holding tank? A kitchen that served hot meals to anyone with a discharge card, no questions asked. Gabriel Vaughn never asked for his name on the building, and he didn't get it. Instead, the plaque by the entrance read, "For those who carried burdens in silence, you are seen." Every Friday, Scarlett Monroe volunteered in the intake room, clipping ID photos, printing welcome packets. And every second Saturday, Genevieve Clark ran a grief circle for veterans' families, including her own. One afternoon, a man walked in, hood up, duffel bag torn at the seams. Scarlett recognized him instantly. Eli, the 10-year-old boy who had once left a peanut butter sandwich by the station door. Now 17, in foster care, and 1 week from aging out. He looked around the room, eyes scanning hope like a language he almost forgot. Gabriel stepped forward. "You still hungry?" he asked. Eli hesitated, then nodded. This time it wasn't bread behind bars. It was a chair, a plate, a place. And for once, Cliffmore Valley wasn't erasing its past. It was rebuilding it, one person at a time. They never planned to name a movement after him, but sometimes the ones who never asked to be remembered are the ones who never fade. The Vaughn Initiative began quietly, just a petition to audit veteran arrests across 3 counties. But within months it spread. Dozens of towns followed, then hundreds. Thousands of dusty files were reopened, some lives repaired, others honored at last. Gabriel never stood at the front of rallies. He didn't give TED Talks or sign book deals. He just kept showing up, coffee in hand, listening more than speaking. But people came anyway, not to hear a speech, to see what accountability could look like in human form. At the National Memorial Wall in D.C., a bronze plaque was added. No name, just a quote. "You don't need a courtroom to restore dignity. Sometimes you just need to stop turning away." One afternoon, Gabriel visited alone. No press, no ceremony. He laid a folded photo at the base of the wall, his daughter at 6, in pigtails holding a paper flag. "She knows now," he whispered, "about all of it." And then he stepped back, one man among thousands. But he'd become something more, a mirror, a reminder, a reason. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, we'd love to hear what that was. Drop your thoughts below. Someone else might need them. And if you believe more stories like this should be told, consider subscribing, because sometimes the quietest voices become the ones that change everything. There are stories that entertain us, and then there are stories that awaken us. Gabriel Vaughn's wasn't about glory. It wasn't wrapped in medals or written in textbooks. It began on a diner floor, humiliated, misunderstood, discarded. A man who once led soldiers through the fog of war, now silenced by the quiet violence of judgment and indifference. But what happened after matters more. He didn't choose vengeance. He chose voice. He didn't seek compensation. He sought justice for others. He reminded a town, and eventually a nation, that dignity is not something we earn with wealth or status. It's something we all carry, and we owe it to each other to protect. From Scarlett's quiet defiance to Genevieve's compassion in the shadows, from a child's sandwich left behind a crate, to a widow pawning her ring to stand beside a man she'd never met, this story whispered something loud. Kindness is power. Courage is contagious. And silence, when broken for the right reasons, can become a healing sound. The greatest battles aren't always fought in war zones. Sometimes they happen in quiet rooms, in court halls, in the human heart. So next time you're tempted to look away, don't. Next time someone's dignity is on the line, stand up. Because the difference between forgotten and remembered is someone like you deciding to care.